Hey, CIA 401, Alex Wiseman here. Welcome to week 11. We are talking about the whole idea of a world culture of education and how that ties into our discussion about globalization and contextualization, and also whether or not the whole idea of a world culture of education is tied into the idea of a global agenda, whether that be a sort of nefarious approach to things, or be a solutionist approach to things, or be just a ubiquitous approach to things. Anyway, it's part of the discussion. So we're going to have a couple different ways of looking at that this week. But one of the things I wanted to point out that, like last week, this week in class we will be spending the whole time on the student-led group discussion of the book Dilemmas of Culture in African Schools. It has a longer title, by Katie Coe, which means that class will be the full 3 hours this week again. But I still want you to work through the readings and the modules for World Culture or Global Agenda. You'll have some lecture from me that I recorded a couple of years ago, but it's, again, same readings, same content, same topic. So I really would like for you to take a look at that. And I really like this week's discussion, so I think you will like it too. I think it's cool. Both of the book and of the readings. All right, let me go back up here. We have a couple of different objectives for the World Culture or Global Agenda thing that I've listed in the objectives section. First of all is we want to just talk about or think about how education systems can be global rather than national or regional, or whether they can only be national or regional and they can't be global. And one of the ways that we're going to think about that is whether or not there are characteristics of INGOs, international non-governmental organizations, that make it easier to coordinate educational activities and pursue common goals across countries simultaneously. If that's the case, if international NGOs are driving this sort of globalness of education, then we want to know why or how, or what are the characteristics, or what are the principles, if we were to borrow some of the language from one of your readings this week. We also want to look at the contested relationship between INGOs and United Nations agencies. And I say contested in that there can be a supportive relationship between the two, or there can be a conflictual relationship between the two. So maybe it's a dialectical relationship rather than contested, but I think you get what I'm talking about. Then we want to see whether globalization implies consensus, or if it's more likely to lead to disagreement and controversy. There is a misunderstanding of some of the work that's been done related to world culture and education. None of the stuff that you're reading for this week, but then the broader comparative and international education and educational development literature. There's been a misunderstanding among some of that research that says that world culture perspectives suggest that everything's leading to consensus, which is a false statement. In fact, it's not, first of all, it's not that simple. Second of all, it has much more to do with shared norms and values and understandings rather than agreement, and certainly never convergence. So the question is, how much consensus versus how much disagreement and controversy? And where does globalization place education on that spectrum? Because remember, from our perspective, globalization and contextualization are always struggling with each other. And so there is going to be more disagreement and controversy, or more adamant emphasis on there being unique characteristics of particular education systems and schools or learning contexts or whatever, as globalization also grows. So they both are rising simultaneously. Both globalization and contextualization are rising simultaneously. How does that happen? We want to think about how INGOs influence the behavior of states, intergovernmental organizations, and corporations, especially regarding the status, resources, and practice of education. And then two ways we're going to think about that is the way that international NGOs are related to human rights, especially through education development, and how international NGOs have used education as a way to influence peace building or conflict resolution, not only between nation states, as I say here, but also within nation states. Or from international NGO perspective to local context perspective. All right, so we got a lot of big and interesting ideas actually this week. I I will admit that I find these questions particularly interesting. But remember, in class, we're going to be looking at dilemmas of culture in African schools. If you're interested, if you're not part of the group that's leading discussion, but you want a preview of the book and the author, these are all hyperlinks, so you can certainly click there. You can also click here if you want to look at the outline for what the student-led group discussion will look like. And again, plan on being in class for the full 3 hours. Even though we won't discuss it explicitly in class, I would like for you to read all of Part 7, Globalization, INGOs, and Civil Society, in the Lechner and Bolai book, The Globalization Reader. And then I'd like for you to also work through the modules here. So the first module is simply asking if there's a world culture of education, and is it a globalized agenda for education? And so the videos in this module, these are going to be me a couple of years ago talking about the exact topic and the exact readings that you have assigned for this week. So it's all right on track. And I'm going to walk through some of the important points from this week's readings and obviously explain both conceptually and with some examples how world culture is related to education and what are some of the ways that the readings also tie into that broader argument. So there are 3 videos that kind of go in a row. I'd like for you to watch all of those. That will bring you up to about 45 minutes. And then I'd like for you to spend the rest of the time on Module 2 for this week, NGOs and their influence on nation states. And remember, we're going to think about human rights, and we're going to think about peace building and conflict resolution as the mechanisms through which NGOs might influence nation states and vice versa. Maybe not vice versa, but and other things, and communities as well. That's what I meant to say. So you're going to have a video on human rights education and training from a UN representative. This is interesting because it thinks about the ways that international NGOs and UN agencies work together related to human rights education and training. Then you're going to look at a more of an informational video on NGOs as engines of human rights protection. It's not specifically related to education, but I think it's really relevant, and I quite frankly like the presentation that they give in this video. And then I'm going to have you look at just a welcome to the Agahozo Shalom Youth Village video. ASYV is an organization, it's a nonprofit organization that actually Lehigh CIE students and myself have worked with over the past few years. Some of you have heard me talk about them before, or you've been in a class where we did projects related to them. This is the kind of international NGO that is influencing conflict resolution and peace building within nations, as well as crossing boundaries between the United States roots of the organization and the Rwanda-based application and quite frankly ongoing organization itself. So really interesting, and we can certainly talk more about ASYV at some point if you like. So to prepare for the class, reflect on the week's objectives while you read the section from the Lechner and Bolai book, while you watch and read the preparation materials in the modules above, and especially as you prepare to participate in the week's discussion of Coe's book led by your classmates. I think it's going to be super exciting. As always, don't forget to put your comments for the week in the leave a reply section down here. And I really am looking forward to class and engaging all of you in discussion. See you soon.